Hi, today we have the March 2021 reading section. We're going to go ahead and start with passage one, which we know is always fiction. Therefore, its job is going to be to entertain, even if we are not necessarily entertained by it. That is going to be what we're looking at. This is a newer piece written in 2008, so that's nice. The narrator describes acting in silent films in the early 1900s. Moran owns his own production company that employs the narrator. All right, so let's take a look. We're going to start with questions. Question number one, as used in line 2. So we know that these are those classic word and context questions. So we're going to go ahead and go to line 2 and circle the word primitive. Moving on to question number 2, the narrator references this idea in order to, so that in order to lets us know it's a purpose function. The place we need to look is line 5, and we're asking ourselves why he references this. It looks like a film title. So line 5, I'm going to go ahead and bracket this chunk, specifically Jamestown Junction. Question number 3, the passage is written from the perspective of someone who. Anytime we have these perspective questions, these are going to be main idea, primary purpose questions. So told from what perspective, told from what narration, that kind of thing. Looking at number 4, reasonably be inferred. We know this is an inference question. Before we read too much further, we're going to see if there's a COE follow-up. There is. So we don't need to know what number 4 is asking about quite yet. We just know that we're going to use number 5 to answer it. I like to make my marks if the questions are not following each other in space. So like if number 5 is not here, I like to go ahead and make my marks down and then up so that I know what I'm looking for. Some students prefer to do this marking, and that is fine. I just find it a little bit more difficult to see for me. Mark these however is easiest for you so that you know that when you go to answer this one, you're going to immediately jump to this one first. That's the entire key. Number 6 looks like a classic word in context. We have as used in line, we have a word in quotations or a small phrase, and then we have different words that could replace that. So let's go ahead and go to line 35, the word convey. Looking at number 7, based on the passage. So we know these are usually content or inference questions. I don't see anything on here that is going to elicit an inference question. No infer, no implies, no suggest, no most likely. So this is going to be a content question. So just like we did earlier, let's see if there's a COE follow-up, and there is. So we don't have to know what this question is asking about quite yet. Number 9, the passage indicates, so that's a content question. It does not look like it has a COE follow-up, so we do need to box some information to see what we're looking at. So the passage indicates, when Hanako criticizes a well-known actor, the narrator does something. So we need to find Hanako criticizing this other actor, and then we need to see what the narrator does in response to that. Number 10, reasonably be inferred, so we know this is an inference question. There's no COE follow-up because this is the last question of the passage. So again, we need to box some information. What is the passage asking about? Hanako believes that an actor's merit depends on what? So we need to see Hanako talking about an actor's merit and kind of what that depends on. So going back to the top, we know we're going to stop at line 2 for this word in context. We're going to consider the purpose of referring to this film. As we're reading the entire piece, we're going to keep track of like the perspective, who's telling the story, and kind of what are they thinking about. We're going to stop at this word in context in line 35. We're going to take note of Hanako criticizing an actor, and we're going to take note of what Hanako thinks an actor's merits are based on. Other than that, let's start at the top. It's amusing in retrospect to think how blank our efforts were in those early years. For my first 2 films, all the interiors were shot on outdoor sets, with canvases draped over them to soften the sun. Okay, so we have these early years, kind of their beginning stages, and it says that even when they were trying to film an indoor scene, they had to use outdoor. So it sounds like they were kind of creating something out of nothing. It was a little bare bones. I may write that just to kind of keep track of what I'm thinking. Bare bones. All copies of this movie that we're talking about, Jamestown Junction, have been lost, so there's no copies of this film. But if the film had survived and you could see it, you would notice that during the office scene, the papers on my desk are disturbed by a mysterious breeze, which shouldn't necessarily happen inside. So maybe we're referencing this specific movie as an example of these primitive efforts. And in the very next scene, you would see a shadow moving in the corner caused by the canvas flapping in the wind. So again, this is to tell us kind of how that film went, how primitive it really was. These were the conditions in which we shot at that time. And because we worked without the benefit of artificial light, there was always a rush to complete the day's filming before the shadows grew too deep in the afternoon. In late May, when we endured an unexpected heat wave, Moran had giant ice blocks delivered to the set and powerful fans placed behind them to blow the cool air in the direction of the players. If it rained, filming would halt altogether, and we would scramble to move all the furniture and props under the complex's few permanent roofs. But despite these challenges, everyone remained in good spirits. So this entire discussion is still about that Jamestown Junction film. So not only are they having to scrap together some sets, it's also really hot, it's raining, everything is just absolute chaos. Despite these challenges, everyone remained in good spirits. We were working, yes, but it felt like play, and it was hard to comprehend the tremendous good fortune that had suddenly befallen me. Oh, that's nice. He feels lucky. Through the making of both films, Hanako gave me constant guidance, which I eagerly accepted, and I immediately discerned the difference between myself, an untrained amateur, and a seasoned professional who knew everything about the art of acting. Indeed, she was perhaps the largest influence on my development as an actor. "There's no audience to see you," she said one day in Japanese as I gestured expansively to blank my anguish. So he's like, I'm so anguished. He's trying to show it to her, or illustrate it, demonstrate. At the death of one of my fellow soldiers. You don't need to project like you would in the theater, as if you're trying to be seen by the person in the last row. Pretend the camera is the one man you're playing to. Oh, so she's just giving him some advice here. On another occasion, when I was perhaps too understated, Hanako approached me after Moran called cut. "You're painting a picture with your body," she said. "Think of pantomime. You must express physically what you can't with your voice, and use your face, your eyes. You have such eyes. They alone speak volumes." Moran nodded in agreement, although he couldn't have understood, and I adjusted my actions accordingly. I was surprised by the extent to which he let Hanako direct things, not only my own performance, but also the placement of props, even the movement of the other actors. Yet all of her suggestions improved the film, and between her advice and Moran's directions, I was slowly learning what to do. The transition from theater, which depends on dialogue, was more difficult than I had imagined. Indeed, many stage actors, even those who didn't disdain the new medium of moving pictures, did not make the change successfully. Hanako Minatoya was one of the few who was equally accomplished in both realms, so stage and film production. I was learning under her tutelage, which is just like tutoring or study, every day. On certain days when we weren't in scenes, Hanako and I would leave the set and walk into the hills. They were vibrant with color, with flowers wherever one looked. Blue flowers and lupin, mariposa lilacs, the wispy orange California poppies. The beauty of that landscape when the air was cool, the sun glinting off the ocean, and the breeze carrying the scent of flowers was so dramatic. I could hardly believe it real. And I was seeing it, feeling it, in the company of an artist whose work I had admired for years. One day on our walk, we were discussing a well-known actor. Okay, this is going to be important. And Hanako surprised me by her reaction to his name. "He is nothing but a face for the fan magazine," she said dismissively. "He is not a genuine actor." "What do you mean?" I asked, although I didn't disagree. Okay, so here is his reaction. We know that that's what we're looking for. So he doesn't disagree, but he does ask her what she means. "It's impossible to distinguish one of his roles from another. He is always the same, and it is obvious why. In order to project a believable fiction, the actor himself must have substance." Okay, so we know we're being asked about what determines an actor's merit, and this is telling us what makes a good actor, as an actor must have substance. "You must possess something internally to perform it externally. He has only a fraction of the talent of an artist such as you." Oh, that's nice. I was, of course, deeply flattered by her compliment, and I did not know how to respond. Hanako continued talking of this actor and that, without noting my reaction. Okay, so going back to this first word in context, the word primitive, we had kind of said like bare bones. They were having to throw some things together. It's not that the materials they were using were ancient, and they probably weren't original. They'd probably scrapped some things together. We know they used a tarp, so it wasn't natural. It was just very basic. They were doing their best with what little they had. Okay, so number 2, why do we refer back to this movie? We know that we had talked about how difficult it was, how basic their productions were, and the storms and the heat and all these things. And we know that there's no copies of Jamestown Junction left, and so no one's ever seen it. Highlight a film that features acting that the narrator aims to emulate. Well, that means to copy, and the narrator is actually in that film, so we can get rid of A. Provide context for the tensions that later surface between the narrator and the others on set. Honestly, there's not really any tensions between him and everyone else on set, maybe between he and the director, but there's also not really tensions in Jamestown Junction. It's just about how terrible the production was. Contrast the responsibilities of the director and the actors. No, we don't see the director within that film. We just see the hardships. Showcase the challenges posed by filming in an outdoor setting. Yes, that will do, because we talked about the shadows, we talked about the heat, we talked about the rain. D is our choice. Number 3 is a main idea, primary purpose, and we're looking at the perspective of the narrator. So does the narrator realize that he cannot meet the challenges of pivoting to a new career? No, it actually says in the passage that he is kind of doing a pretty good job, and he's under the tutelage of Hanako, who is one of the few actors who has really successfully made this transition. He regrets not making more of an effort to achieve his professional goals. I don't see any regrets being discussed, and it seems like he is achieving his goals. The narrator is enthusiastic about recent technological developments affecting his profession. They barely mention the new film industry, other than to say that it is a new industry, so it can't be C. He's nostalgic about experiences towards the beginning of his career. Yes, this entire thing is told as a flashback, and he has very happy memories. He feels very grateful for her time. She gives him compliments. D is our answer. Looking at number 4, we know it's a COE, so we're going to find information from number 4, locate that discussion in one of these lines of evidence, and choose that first. So, as a young man, the narrator attributed his employment in films to. So the narrator kind of gives like credit for his employment. So like, why does he think he has gained employment? Let's look at line 11 through 15 first. So I like to do these little brackets just so I can kind of keep track. These were the conditions in which we shot at the time, and because we worked without the benefit of artificial light, there was always a rush to complete the day's filming before the shadows grew too deep in the afternoon. Okay, so that doesn't say why he got this job. We can get rid of that one. 24 through 26. We were working, yes, okay, employment, but it felt like play, and it was hard to comprehend the tremendous good fortune that had suddenly befallen me. Okay, so this may be it, because it talks about him working, and it says that he is working because of good fortune or luck or something wonderful happening. So we can hold on to that one. He's at least working in it. 27 through 28. Through the making of both films, Hanako gave me constant guidance, which I eagerly accepted. That does not talk about how he came to be employed, just what happened as he was employed, so we can get rid of that one. 29 through 32. And I immediately discerned the difference between myself, an untrained amateur, and a seasoned professional who knew everything about the art of acting. So that does talk about him working, but not how he came to be an actor, just the difference between him and someone who is really good at it. So it has to be this line that, yes, he was working, but it felt like play, and good fortune had befallen him. So he attributed his employment, the fact that he is working, but it felt like play, to good fortune. So we don't learn about his acting skills. We can get rid of A. We never learn of a fan base. We can get rid of B. Lucky happenstance feels like good fortune. And then his friendship with Hanako. So he didn't get the job because of Hanako, but he did learn a lot from Hanako. Unfortunately, that does not connect to the line we chose, nor does it say how he came to be employed. So it is C. Number 6, the word in context. We talked about him wanting to show this to her or demonstrate it to her. So the closest word for that is going to be communicate. Number 7 and 8 are a COE pair. We need to see why Hanako in what way, so how, does Hanako most directly influence the character's development? Okay, so it's a content question. So we need to see Hanako directly influencing the narrator and his growth. So starting with line 53 through 56. 1, 2, 3. Yet all of her suggestions improved the films, and between her advice and Ron's direction, I was slowly learning what to do. Okay, so it does say that he gives her advice, but it's more improving the film, and that he was slowly learning what to do. So I don't know that that's enough to get rid of, but let's see if we can find something better. So I'm not going to totally cross it out. Number 61 through 63. Oh, that's still on this page. All right, Hanako Montoya was one of the few who was equally accomplished in both realms. I was learning under her tutelage every day. So this feels more direct because he's learning under her every day. Because it's a content question, that direct line feels a little bit better than just him giving her directions and him improving. So we're going to hold on to B. 64 through 66. On certain days, when we weren't in scenes, Hanako and I would leave the sets and walk into the hills. That doesn't show how she's directly affecting his development, so we'll get rid of C. 89 through 90. I was, of course, deeply flattered by her compliment, and I did not know how to respond. That's nice, but it doesn't show how he developed. So B is our answer, that he was learning under her tutelage. All right, so she praises his skills to boost his confidence. No. Unfortunately, that would match D, so if you were to have chosen D, that would make you get both of these wrong. She advises him on balancing popularity. We don't see a discussion of popularity, so we'll get rid of that. She shares lessons learned from having made the same career shift that he is making. Okay, possibly, because it does say that she was successful, equally accomplished in both realms, theater and film, so maybe. She convinces Moran, the director, to allow the narrator to take on more prominent roles. We don't see that discussion really happening anywhere, so C is our answer for number 7. Number 9 is our content question that did not have a COE follow-up, but we did kind of see that happen. We noticed that Hanako criticized a well-known actor, and I believe the narrator asked her what she meant, even though he did not disagree. Oh, sorry. One day on our walk, we were discussing a well-known actor, and Hanako surprised me by her reaction to his name. He is nothing but a face for the fan magazines, she said. He is not a genuine actor. What do you mean? I asked, although I didn't disagree. All right, so that's his reaction right here. What do you mean? I asked, though I didn't disagree. So the narrator fears Hanako will address him with the same criticism. No, there's no sense of fear. Concurs or agrees with his opinion of the actor, but is curious about the reasoning behind her criticism. Yes. What that comes with, the curious comes with the what do you mean, and then the concurs is the did not disagree. He is disappointed that Hanako does not respect the actor, but continues to admire the actor himself. Note, because it said he did not disagree with her disrespect of him. Understands Hanako's argument, but respectfully disagrees. So again, he does not disagree. It must be B. Number 10 is the inference. We did discuss an actor's merit over here. An actor himself must have substance. You must possess something internally to perform it externally. So that the actor's merit depends on training is incorrect. The depth of the actor's own feeling, possibly. The actor's willingness to take on roles. We don't really see a discussion of roles. Actor's ability to overlook unfavorable audience reactions. We don't see an audience here. So it's just the depth of an actor's own feelings, the substance. And that is all for passage 1. Okay, moving on to passage 2, which we know is always going to be either global conversation or social science. This piece was written in 2017. It has graphs, and it talks about small news outlets' influence. So that's going to be a social science. It's going to be informative by nature. Let's go ahead and start diagnosing some questions. Number 11. So even though it says purpose is 2, this is not a purpose function question. It references the entire passage. So that becomes a main idea, primary purpose. Remember, this is important because as we navigate answer choices, the main idea, primary purpose answers are often very vague, whereas the purpose function questions are answering how is the author establishing this, or how is this chunk acting within the piece as a whole. Main idea questions are going to be a little bit different than that. That is why it's so important to differentiate between those two, especially when you see something like the main purpose of a paragraph. Number 12 is a classic word and context question. Let's go to line 4 and circle the word interfere. Number 13 is a COE standalone. We see these lines of evidence, but it's not referencing the question above. It's referencing a specific claim. We don't need to prepare for that in any way. Number 14 says according to, so we know that that is a content question. We need to see if there is a COE follow-up before we move forward. There is not, so let's box some information in question 14. The opinion articles used in the study had what impact on the opinions of Twitter users? So we know we're going to be talking about articles. So articles had what impact on opinions of Twitter users? Number 14, word and context. Let's go to line 55 and circle the word boosted. Reasonably be inferred for number 16, classic inference. There is not a COE follow-up, so let's see what this is asking. Design of the experiment made it less likely. So what did they kind of curtail in the design of their experiment? Moving on to number 17, most strongly suggest. Another great inference question. It does have a COE follow-up, so let's make our big mark so we know to use the COE to answer the original question. 19, according to, classic content. It also does not have a COE follow-up. The next one does reference figure 2, which is concerning, or not concerning, but that would stand to reason that we had a figure 1 above it, which we do. So even though this is it says according to, it's according to the figure. So let's go ahead and reevaluate this one because it's not. It's a graph. So once we have one graph, we know that the rest of them are going to be graphs as well. We can take a look at those at the end. So we know that we need to stop and discuss this word in context in line 4. We need to look for how the articles impacted the opinions of Twitter users. Another word in context in 55, and then we need to look for something about the design of the experiment and how that curtailed maybe some kind of issue. So words like design are going to be important because as we see an experimental protocol, we need to know that the answer to this is going to be in the design or the methods, not necessarily the results. So let's take a look at what we got. Assessing the influence of news media is tricky. Researchers can't peer into voting booths or people's living rooms, and news organizations aren't typically willing to have outsiders blank with their content. So change, manipulate, bother. That's why it took a team of social scientists about 5 years to get 48 news organizations to agree to run an unusual set of experiments. Instead of simply analyzing their instead of simply tracking what the outlets were publishing and analyzing their impact on public opinion, the researchers took an approach similar to that used in clinical trials to evaluate the effects of new drugs. They manipulated the types of news stories run and then assigned a treatment week when the stories would run and a control week when they wouldn't. This way they could tell whether those particular stories were having any effect on public discussion. Most participating outlets were small, with fewer than an estimated 200,000 page views per month, and a few were mid-sized. The nonprofit news organization's Truth Out, based in Chicago, Illinois, represented a large outlet with an estimated 2 million views. So we have mostly small, a few medium, and then this one large guy. The researchers, led by Gary King of Harvard University, asked groups of 2 to 5 of these news outlets to write stories on broad policy areas, including race, immigration, and climate. For example, if the broad area was technology policy, the specific story might be what Uber drivers think about self-driving cars. The outlets could choose the policy area, the stories to cover, and the type of articles to write, such as investigative reports versus opinion pieces. However, the researchers could reject a story if it was outside a specific policy area. The outlets were free to publish whatever they wanted outside of the experiment. Okay, so this is the design. So I think that question that asked about what they did in the design, there might be an answer here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a star. Then the researchers flipped a coin to decide which of the 2 consecutive weeks these clusters of stories all on the same topic would run. Finally, they measured the number of tweets about both the specific stories and the broader policy issues during the week when the stories ran compared to the week when they didn't. So it sounds like they would kind of pick one idea, one topic, and all of the stories on that topic would run 1 week together, and then they would check Twitter to see if that impacted tweets. Twitter posts on these topics increased by nearly 63% over the week, so that's the impact of the stories on Twitter users, so I think there's an answer here. On average, Americans wrote more than 13,000 additional social media posts about specific policy area on the day the stories ran and in the following 5 days. What's more, the cluster of stories swayed people's opinion by 2.3%, suggesting that news media might in some cases change people's beliefs. The team repeated the experiment 35 times and observed that stories blank posting, so increased posting, by men and women alike, as well as by people living in different U.S. regions with different political orientations and influences on Twitter. Removing large outlets from the analysis didn't change the effect on public conversation much, suggesting that no single large news organization was responsible for the increase. So that was that one large media that they talked about. They must have taken them out of the results and kind of viewed it separate and noticed that he did not make a change. However, if the researchers had recruited large mainstream outlets, the spike in discussions might have been much bigger. When they looked at stories published by the New York Times on little discussed topics such as how fracking affects the quality of drinking water, they found that Twitter posts about the broader issue of water quality increased by 300% in just 1 day. So that's what happened when we did look at the large market. Though excited by the study, economist Matthew Gensoff points out that only about 20% of Americans use Twitter, so the results might not be widely applicable outside social media. But to King, Twitter users are a valuable resource to assess the agenda-setting power of media because they represent those people who are willing to speak up to influence policy. All right, so main idea of the passage. Remember, if you struggle to answer these, you can always save them for last and let the other questions guide your understanding of the passage. But we can also take an approach that anything that is a detail or an example or is too specific is not the correct answer. So let's look at it that way. Summarize open questions with respect to social media and propose a study to examine the question in greater depth. Well, the issue with that is that they didn't just propose a study, they ran it. So we can get rid of that one because the end is incorrect. Introduce a common misunderstanding about mainstream media outlets and describe a study that challenges that misunderstanding. Well, it seems like that study actually agreed with this idea. I don't know that we could call it a misunderstanding, but even if we did, the study doesn't challenge that misunderstanding. It kind of agrees with it. Outline a study that compares trends in social media use among different demographic groups and suggest an explanation for the results of that study. Well, it said men and women kind of all increased their Twitter output, and so I don't think that we're comparing and contrasting across demographic groups. Describe a study's novel or new, this just means new, way of assessing the impact of news media on public opinion. Yes, this feels more accurate. And report the findings of that study. So the focus here is on news medias and what their stories do to public opinion. That's the entire premise of the article. Number 12, the word interfere with. So we kind of said we're talking about news organizations and they don't want people messing with or changing or altering their content. And so it's not opposing, it's not going up against, it's not preventing them from publishing it, it's changing it. So modify feels the closest to that. Suspend means to stop. Looking at number 13, which choice best supports the idea that researchers need a mechanism to determine whether changes in public opinion were the result of the experimental stories and not some other factor. Okay, they need a mechanism to determine whether results were from this or from that. So to me, that kind of sounds like they are implementing some kind of control in their experiment. So it's not the experimental studies that are making this change. It's something, it could be something else or it could not be something else. Lines 1 through 4. Assessing the influence of news media is tricky. Researchers can't peer into voting booths or people's living rooms, and news organizations aren't typically willing to have outsiders interfere with their content. So that doesn't really talk about a change in public opinion at all, whether it's driven by the experimental stories or something else. 5 through 7. That's why it took a team of social scientists 5 years to get these organizations to agree to run an unusual set of experiments. Again, that's just discussing the possibility of an experiment, not a change in public opinion. 7 through 11. Instead of simply tracking what outlets were publishing and analyzing their impact on public opinion, the researchers took an approach similar to that used in clinical trials to evaluate the effects of new drugs. So we do mention public opinion, but we don't see that like control or that making sure that one thing is not changing it versus another. 12 through 16. They manipulated the type of news stories run and then assigned a treatment week when the stories would match or would run and a control week when they wouldn't. That sounds good already. This way they could tell whether those particular stories were having an effect on public discussion or opinion. So D is our answer. Number 11, we're looking for that impact of articles on the opinions of Twitter users. We saw their opinion was swayed by 2.3%. So Twitter users' opinions changed to be increasingly negative. All right, so we don't see any discussion of negative. Twitter users' opinions changed somewhat towards favoring the article's position on the policy. Okay, somewhat, that's 2%. Favoring the article's position on the policy area, let's double check. In the ideological direction of the opinion article, so B feels pretty good. Twitter users' opinions showed no measurable change. Okay, we did see a change. Twitter users' opinions changed only in response to stories on policy that they already were interested in. We don't see what those stories necessarily were, so B is the answer. Looking at number 15, we said that the word boosted meant increased. The closest connection to increase we have here is raised. Number 16, we need to find something in the design of the team's experiment that made it less likely for something to happen. So this is a little interesting because normally we would be hunting for this answer after line 55, but we need to look at the design of the experiment. So going back, let's see what they kind of prevented from happening based on their design. The researchers, led by King, asked groups of 2 to 5 of these news outlets to write stories on broad policy. For example, if the broad policy was, or the broad area was technological policy, the specific story might be Uber drivers and self-driving cars. The outlets could choose the policy area, the stories to cover, and the type of articles, such as investigative reports or opinion pieces. And then the researchers could reject a story if it was outside the specific policy area. The outlets were free to publish whatever story they wanted outside the experiment. So they could still post those stories. The researchers didn't have to use them. So the news outlets had a lot of control over what they were posting, probably to kind of keep some continuity. So let's take a look. Twitter users would read more stories from participating news outlets than they usually did. There's no discussion of an increase of readership. News media outlets would be able to choose which stories to publish outside of treatment weeks. Okay, so that one is accurate at least. But that says that they did do that, so it wouldn't be making it less likely. So actually we can get rid of B because it's oppositionally true. The experiment made it less likely for this to happen. Well, this is exactly what was happening. Twitter users would realize that there was something unusual about the media outlet's publication output. Well, they wouldn't notice that because they made sure to let the news outlets choose what they were writing about and write their own stories. So maybe this is it. We have to keep that made it less likely in mind because it is an inference question. News media outlets would run stories on any particular topic for more than 1 week. Okay, so we don't necessarily see that discussed. What we're trying to avoid is for people to be aware of the experiment, so C is the correct answer. 17 has a COE follow-up. It is asking for what additional study would help to determine more precisely the extent to which news media outlets shape public opinion. So we need to see, like, what else could we do to see which news media outlets were shaping public opinion. 54 through 58. The team repeated the experiment 35 times and observed stories increased posting by men and women alike, as well as people living in different U.S. regions with different political orientations and influence on Twitter. Okay, so that's the experiment itself. That doesn't reference a new experiment or an additional study that should happen. 62 through 64. However, if the researchers had recruited large mainstream outlets, the spike in discussions might have been much bigger. Okay, so we could study that to see if that was true, but that doesn't really take note of the extent to which the news media outlets shape public opinion. All right, so we can get rid of that one. 70 through 73. Though excited by the study, economist Matthew Gensko points out that only 20% of Americans use Twitter, so the results might not be widely applicable outside of social media. I wonder if we could do an experiment to determine if people other than Twitter users are impacted by this. So let's hold on to that because that could be an additional study. Since it is an inference question, that hypothetical might be our line of evidence. 73 through 77. But to King, Twitter users are a valuable resource to assess the agenda-setting power of media because they represent those people who are willing to speak up. Okay, so that does not suggest any further study, so we'll get rid of that one. So it is this idea of C, that not everyone has Twitter, and so we may need additional studies to see what people outside of social media, outside of Twitter, might think. So we might need a study that examines how influential news media outlets are to people who do not participate in social media. That feels good because it's people without Twitter. We might need a study that determines whether users on different social media platforms get news from different media outlets. So we're looking for people without social media, so that's not the case. A study that captures the most common age range. No discussion of age there. A study that assesses whether people who participate in social media are more likely to become involved in changing U.S. policy. We don't quite get that far, so it is just A. Now we can start talking about the graphs. According to the model in Figure 1, number of Twitter posts on the relevant topic in excess of the average. Okay, so let's look at this one. Figure 1, number of Twitter posts in excess of the average. And it looks like it decreases over a 6-day period, never quite reaching 0, but getting pretty close. So increase from day 1 to day 2, note we see a steady decline. Was approximately 0 by day 3? No, not by day 3, maybe by day 6. It was greater than 0 for 2 weeks. We don't get 2 weeks, we only see those 6 days. Decrease throughout days 1 through 6, yes, following the experimental news story. So that's exactly what that graph says. Number 20, which statement best reflects the model in Figure 2? So let's take a look at that one. All right, so Figure 2 shows a percent change in number of posts compared to average. So a higher percentage change would be here, and a lower percentage change would be down here. So people of high influence experienced less change and stayed pretty consistent, whereas low influence experienced a bigger change, but then that change dissipated over time. On day 1, following publication of the experiment news stories, Twitter users with high influence showed a lower percentage change than those with low influence. So that's correct, because they showed let's look at this again. They showed a lower percentage change. So if we look back, high influence is down here, therefore that's a lower percentage of change than up here. On day 4, following the publication, Twitter users with low influence had the same change in their numbers as all Twitter users. So day 4, low influence. So day 4, low influence is down here, so that's not the same. It would be the same kind of like up here at day 2 1/3. On day 5, high influence posted as frequently. Okay, so we don't really see a frequency, and on day 5, day 5 is a little bit lower, but it's just percent change. So we can get rid of C. D, on day 6 following publication, all Twitter users posted on the relevant topics less frequently than they usually did. So again, we're not looking at frequency, we're looking at percent change, and they just didn't have as high of a percent change. So this one is going to be A. And that is all for passage 2. Now we can move on to passage 3, which we know is natural science. It is informative by nature, and this one does have a graph. So if you were looking for an eject cord passage, this could be one, this could be an option. We know that graphs give us a lot of tier 1 questions, and so we might actually navigate this one as both a traditional setting and then kind of discuss some tiers along the way. All right, so number 21, the main idea of the passage. So that's a main idea, primary purpose. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the passage? So we know that to be a developmental pattern. Both of these are going to be tier 3s. So they might have to wait to the end if you're eject cording. According to the passage, so here's a great little content characterization question. It does not have a COE follow-up. So we need to find a reason that bees may have mastered the task, such as string pulling. So mastered tasks such as string pulling. This one is an inference question. It has that word inferred. It does have a COE follow-up, so we can go ahead and loop these together. This is going to be a tier 1 pair. Content questions are usually going to be a tier 2 question if they don't have a pair. This one doesn't have a word like an X or a capital to look for, but it does have string pulling. So we can always hunt that down if we need to. Number 26, based on the results of the ball moving tasks, most likely agree, so that's an inference question. It does have a COE follow-up. So again, we have another tier 1 pair. So you could go ahead and answer that one if you were doing the eject cord method. As used in line 62, great little word and context question, also a tier 1. We're going to go to line 62 and circle the word means. Here we go. Sorry, it took me a minute to find that guy. Number 29, which statement? And this is a figure question, so this is a graph. It's supported by the data, so this is just a tier 1 graph question, so you could go ahead and answer that one if you were doing an eject cord method. According to figure 2, so another graph. Which combination of demonstration type and the ball distance from the center of the platform yielded the least success? So again, a tier 1. Tier 1. And then, oh, look, we have this little word in context snuck in here. That's interesting. So line 69, the word limited, that would also be a tier 1 if you were working through it in that way. So we know that if we're doing it the traditional way, we know we need to look for the overall structure of the passage. We need to look for why bees have master tasks like string pulling. We need to stop at this word means in 62. And then we also need to stop at this word limited in 69. Luckily, they're pretty close together. Other than that, we have COE pairs and graphs. Most people don't often think about bees' brain power. Bees are generally regarded as tiny, unthinking machines, flying from flower to flower, genetically pre-programmed to collect pollen and nectar and make honey. But bees have some impressive cognitive capacities. Bumblebees and honeybees can count, navigate complex environments, learn concepts, use their uncertainty to guide their decisions, and even display emotion-like behavior. Recently, bees have also been trained to solve complex cognitive tasks such as string pulling and cat pushing to gain rewards. Okay, so we see string pulling mentioned. But as impressive as these tasks might be, they resemble some of the bees' natural foraging behaviors. So that's why they're able to learn it. So here's the answer to that question. Our research group wanted to test the behavioral limits of bumblebees by tasking them with something far removed from anything they encounter in nature. So we've managed to show that bees can play football, sort of. We show that they can learn to move a small ball to a goal to gain a sugary reward. To do this, we used a plastic model bee on the end of a transparent stick to move a tiny ball across a platform as a real bumblebee watched. When the ball reached a specific location at the center of the platform, it opened access to rewarding sugar water. After several observations, each real bee we tested picked up how to solve the task and no longer needed demonstrations. Okay, so this kind of seems like a first step. While mastering this unnatural task was impressive, we were curious to know how bees were actually learning to solve it. So we tested 3 further groups of bees. One group of bees watched another previously trained bee move the ball to the center, so that's number 1. A second group of bees observed the ball moving to the center by itself. We used a magnet under the platform to move the ball. And a third group of bees did not receive any demonstration. So this is going to be the 3 little sub-experiments that we're looking at. The movement of the ball with the magnet was enough for some of the bees to learn the task significantly better than the bees who did not receive any demonstration. But all 10 bees observing another bee move the ball to the center solved the task much quicker and at a higher success rate than either of the other groups. This suggests that the observer bees picked up something important from their fellow bees that helped them learn this natural task. Okay, so here we have all the other little parts, and we have the observer bees. The design of this experiment also allowed us to ask a novel question in social learning experiments when learning from others. Will bees simply copy what they see, or can they improve upon it? Okay, so we have a new question. During each of the observation trials, there were 3 balls positioned at varying distances from the center of the platform, but it was always the furthest ball that was moved during the demonstration. But during the test trials on their own, the observer bees almost always moved the closest ball to the center. This suggests that bees weren't simply copying what they saw during the demonstration, but actually improved upon the task by using the easiest means or method or way of doing things. Okay, so this is like kind of a 5th experiment. Our current findings suggest with convincing evidence that a miniature brain is not necessarily simple, but can solve an impressively complex task. In fact, we are not yet aware of cognitive ability that is specific to large brains. What's more, neurobiology and modeling research suggests that a very blank number of neurons, even just a few, so small, can accomplish rather complex cognitive tasks. We have shown that bumblebees can solve a task they are unlikely to have ever seen in evolutionary history. No flower has likely ever required bees to move an object into the center to gain access to nectar. The fact that bees learn this unnatural and complex task through observation alone and can improve on what they saw rather than simply copy what they observed shows an unprecedented amount of cognitive flexibility in an animal with such a small brain. Okay, so bees learn to move this ball, and they do it either by observing another bee, watching the ball move by itself, or watching other real bees move the ball. Once they've done that, some bees actually can change the method that they're doing it to accomplish the task in an easier way. The main idea of this passage is that bees learn by mimicking demonstrated behavior. Okay, so sometimes they were watching fake bees, sometimes they were watching real bees, but sometimes they didn't get a demonstration, so I think A might be incorrect because of that issue. Bees may have a greater cognitive flexibility than most other insects. They do have greater cognitive flexibility than we thought, but we don't really discuss other insects, so B is incorrect. Bees can master simple tasks and then demonstrate them for other bees. True, but not all of them were asked to demonstrate the task, so we can get rid of that one. Bees can learn unfamiliar tasks and then execute them efficiently. Yes, that one is nice and vague. It doesn't bring up a detail or an example, and it doesn't misrepresent the passage. So the overall structure of the passage, we know we kind of saw a question and we saw some experiments to see what we can find out about that question and answer it, and then we saw the evidence presented. All right, so an experiment to test an existing hypothesis, that kind of feels like a problem, is presented. That hypothesis is revised. Nope. Okay. An experiment that produces unexpected data about bees is introduced. The source of the data is traced to faulty research design. We don't see that. B is incorrect. A generalization or idea about bees is mentioned. Yes. Information challenging that generalization is noted. Okay, so this is like the small brains thing. And an experiment that deepens understanding of bees is presented. Perhaps. We do say that we think that they are not intelligent, but then we've noticed all this behavior, and then we do an experiment that shows us just how amazing their cognitive ability is. A criticism about the lack of research on bees is voiced. No, we don't start off the article by saying that there's not enough research on this. A new experiment is proposed in response to that criticism, and a hypothesis. No, D is incorrect. So C is our answer. Number 2, we're looking for why bees are good at mastering tasks such as string pulling. And we saw that line that told us that it was kind of a natural behavior for them. So string pulling, this task resembles some of the bees' natural foraging behavior. Bees are exceptionally responsive to sugar rewards. No, we're looking for a foraging behavior. Bees are quick to copy trained bees. No, there were no trained bees in this experiment yet. Behaviors stimulate highly developed parts of the bees' brains. We don't see a discussion of the stimulation of their brains at this point. So the motions of string pulling are similar to what they perform in a natural setting, such as foraging. D is our answer. Now we have our first COE pair. Some of the bees participating in the initial training activity. Okay, so we need to be in the initial training activity, and we need to see what some of the bees did and what some of them did not do. Starting with number 19 through 21. So we've managed to show that bees can play football, sort of. We showed that they can learn to move a small ball to a goal to gain a sugary reward. That kind of introduces the experiments, but it doesn't show what some bees can do that others cannot. 22 through 24. To do this, we used a plastic model bee on the end of a transparent stick to move a tiny ball across a platform as a real bumblebee watched. All right, so that's telling us what they were hoping to do, but it doesn't say what some bees were able to do and some bees were not. 24 through 26. From when? When the ball reached a specific location at the center of the platform, it opened access to a rewarding sugar water. So again, that doesn't really tell us what some bees could do that others could not. 27 through 29. After several observations, each real bee we tested picked up how to solve the task and no longer needed demonstrations. Okay, so this says that they all could do it, but it was after several observations. What is the question asking? Reasonably inferred that after participating in the initial training, so this was after all the training. So after all the training, they all were able to accomplish the task, which means that after the initial training, some of them needed more demonstrations. Okay, so A, they were unable to solve the task after a single demonstration. Yes, they needed more. They were transfixed by the appearance of the plastic Model B. The claw. Nope, that is not the correct answer. C, the bees could access the sugar water without moving the ball. Incorrect. They had to get it to the goal in order for that gate to open. And that some bees had no prior experience with goal-oriented tasks. We can get rid of that one. So A is our answer. Number 26 and 27 are our next pair. The authors would most likely agree with what statement based on the results of the ball moving tasks. So lines 40 through 43. The movement of the ball with the magnet was enough for some bees to learn the task significantly better than bees who did not receive a demonstration. Okay. 46 through 49. This suggests the observer bees picked up something important from their fellow bees that helped them learn this unnatural task. Okay. So what is the difference between that first one and the second one? The movement of the ball with the magnet was enough for some of the bees to learn the task better than those who did not receive demonstration, versus this suggests that observer bees picked up something important from the fellow bees that helped them learn from this natural task. This idea of a suggestion gives us something that the authors of the piece might agree with. So already B is a better answer than A. It is an inference question, so we are looking for something that they would most likely agree with. 50 through 53. The design of this experiment also allowed us to ask a novel question in social learning experiments. When learning from others, will bees simply copy what they see, or can they improve upon it? They would assume that they could improve upon it, but that is not stated in this line. 59 through 62. This suggests that bees weren't simply copying what they saw during demonstrations, but actually improved upon the task by using the easiest means. Okay, so looking between D and B, B shows that bees are capable of learning from others, and so it is the correct answer. And we're going to match that with an answer for number 26. They don't learn through trial and error. We know that they learn from observing others. They do not learn in incremental steps. They're just mimicking, but mimicking and improving. They can learn effectively by observing the behaviors of other bees. Okay, that is accurate. Bees imitate the actions of other bees and learn by repeating their movements. So again, because we see them improve on the task, it is actually going to be C instead of D. Number 28, the words in context for the word means. We talked about way or method of doing things, and the closest answer to that is approach. Number 29 is our first graph question. Which statement about the bee's success in the ball moving task is best supported by the data in figure 1? So figure 1 is over here. So the trained bee took 40 times to solve a task, or 40 seconds to solve a task. A bee that had watched a magnet move ball took longer, and a bee that received no demonstration took the longest. So observer bees of trained bees or magnet move balls benefited from seeing a demonstration before attempting to solve the task. Okay, that would be accurate because in both situations where they received a demonstration, they're faster than not receiving a demonstration. Bees that received no demonstration required assistance. We don't see any assistance, it just took them longer. Observer bees that saw the demonstration of the magnet ball solved the task as quickly as those that received no demonstration. Okay, that is inaccurate. They were a little faster than the no demonstration, but not as fast as the ones who got to watch the real bee. Bees that saw the demonstration with the trained bee were the only bees that succeeded. Okay. Very rarely is an only going to be correct on the SAT. And this graph proves that it's not in this situation. Now we can look at number 30. We're looking at figure 2. Which combination of demonstration types and the ball's distance from the center of the platform yielded the least success in solving the task? Okay, so let's look at figure 2. This is actually a 3-part bar. So right now these bars all look to be the same color. The nearest is going to be these green bars. And then the middle is in the middle, which is convenient, and then the furthest is furthest away. Whenever you see a key like this, and the printing on the test may be a little hard to determine, just know that the top is going to start at an axis, so in this case, this axis, and then go up from there. If it's top to bottom, it's either going to be x-axis up on a graph, or left to right on a graph, depending on how it's being read. But there is an order to things. On the test day, on test day, it will be very clear. So it looks like the least effective, you kind of have to separate these out in chunks, is going to be this tiny, tiny bar. So none at furthest away. So no demonstration furthest away was the least successful because it's the smallest bar. So let's see if we can find an answer that matches that. So no demonstration, so it's going to be either C or D. And the furthest ball, so it's going to be D. As used in line 69, the word limited, so we talked about it being small and looked at as one of our answer choices. It is small. And that is all for passage 3. All right, guys, we have our fourth passage. This is Passage 4. It was written in 1833, so I already know it is my global conversation piece. It's going to be informative by nature, and it is not paired. Question 32 starts out with according to. I already know that this is a content question. It does not have a COE follow-up, so it looks like I'm going to be going to line 2. I'm going to be thinking about what the author considers the campaign of the abolitionists to be strange because it requires them to do something. So what the abolitionists are doing is strange because of what? The author suggests, I know this is an inference question, it has a COE follow-up, so I don't need to know anything about this yet. Central claim in the passage, that's a clear MIPP, main idea. The statement best describes the method the author employs, so between author employs and these line references, I can tell this is a purpose function question. I'm going to go to line 17 through 45 and go ahead and bracket those. Now, this is a big chunk. If on test day I'm already behind, I may use this as a, I may use this as a sacrifice question, which means that I may preemptively choose B and then come back and double check if I have time. 37 also has line references and says primarily serves 2. Again, I know that's a purpose function. I can go to line 18 through 21. Wrong page flip, sorry. 18 through 21. And know that I'm looking for this description of Galileo, and so it's like a purpose function within a purpose function. 38, passage strongly suggests. Again, I already know this is an inference question. It does have a COE follow-up, so I can loop those together and worry about them later. Number 40, in context of the piece, as their traducers have represented, most strongly suggest, so little inference question, but tells us where to look and what to look at. So I'm looking, it does not have a COE follow-up, so I'm looking for what is being implied by this line. So I'll just have to read around that when I get there. The author's attitude towards Garrison is described, so this word description, and I'm asking about a detail, that's going to be a content and characterization question, and I'm really just looking for the attitude towards Garrison. In line 71, at once, this is a clear word in context, so I just need to go to line 71 and circle the word at once. Okay, so I need to find why what the abolitionists are doing is strange. I need to look definitely for Galileo's experience and why we use that description. I need to consider what traducers strongly represented, what that means, and then look for the attitude on Garrison and stop to consider what the phrase at once means. I've often asked myself what prosperity or the future would think of the strange contest in which the abolitionists are engaged. So here we see it being strange, but why? Here we meet time after time, newspapers are printed and speeches delivered to prove what? That a man is a man and that he is the only human possessor of himself. But these propositions are self-evident. And self-evident propositions, we all know, though most difficult to be proved, are the most easily understood because they need no proof. The mind sees their truth intuitively, without the aid of reasoning. Okay, so this is what the abolitionists are doing, and it feels strange because we should just know this. The attempt to prove them, therefore, would be ridiculous were it not for the consideration of the amazing state of delusion and vassalage to which prejudice reduces the mind when unenlightened by reason. Okay, so it should be self-evident, but people are disillusioned. The history of every age, we need to consider how he sets up his argument here. The history of every age shows the truth of this assertion. At one time, we see Galileo thrown into prison by the Inquisition because he had made some discoveries, and forced to purchase his liberty by retracting his opinions. So it looks like Galileo learned something, and we called him on this learning, and he was forced to lie about what he had learned in order to gain freedom. When therefore we see the control which prejudice, aided by circumstances and encouraged by self-interest, has in times past exercised over human mind, and the tenacity with which it has held its deluded victims, stopping up the avenues of improvement, clipping the wings of genius, and slowing the progress of truth, when we see the minds whose energies have been crippled and whose spheres of action have been curtailed by its influence, when we see the power which reformers have brought to bear against the prevailing sins of the ages in which they lived, the firm opposition they encounter, and the long struggles which preceded a better state of things. So it's all these things that abolitionists and reformers in general are up against. We are led by reasoning to believe that the contest in which we are engaged currently, the abolitionist movement, is not an unnatural one, that it is not so dissimilar in its character and measures to others which have been carried triumphantly through, and that the modern champions of freedom, the abolitionists, do not savor so much in practicality as their traducers have represented. So their traducers are representing that they have more of this in practicality than they really do. And that the unfortunate men whose cause they have espoused have as just a claim to humanity as their oppressors, and like them have been created a little lower than angels. How was it 5 years ago in regard to the question of slavery? A gloom hung over the moral atmosphere which nothing seemingly could dissipate, save a miracle from God himself. All saw it, but no one dared expose his own breast to the pitiless peltings of the gathering storm. The pulpit and the press, instead of being faithful to their trust, were the panders to the general lust. But mind, like matter, must have its legitimate scope. There are always some spirits who will resist an unnatural domination. And such a spirit was found in the father of American anti-slavery. Okay, so this is introducing a new person, and I don't know his name yet. In that dark hour he arose to cheer us on our gloomy pathway. The shafts of criticism and sarcasm and denunciation which rang against him told only where he stood up unscathed, in his moral and intellectual might, and bearing down all opposition. Okay, so he seems pretty great. The result is well known, nor does Mr. Garrison, oh, he was important, need any eulogy from me. So I think Mr. Garrison is the person we're saying all these great things about. The task of the reformer is far from an agreeable one. The hidden springs which are to be touched by him and set into motion are not discernible to the common eye, and if they were, he would know how to approach or dare or meddle with them. He scatters his truth among the bodies politic, and the effect is critical. He is greeted with smiles and frowns, so those are two different things that he's getting at the same time. With blessings and curses, so again, two different things at the same time. With eulogy and abuse. Now he is almost stifled with the caresses of devoted friends, and soon he is exposed to the fury of bloodthirsty mob. Okay, so just for the sake of time, since I know I've handled all my questions once I've read the line 71, I'm going to skip this unless I have a direct question about it. So now we can go ahead and answer all of our questions. The first one asked about why the abolitionist movement was strange and what it required them to do. We noticed that this was discussed right here, where it said that this should be self-evident and that people should kind of already know that a man is in charge of himself. So looking at the answer choices, there's no discussion of future generations. Others should be it should be very obvious to everyone that this is the truth, so we can keep B. There's no discussion of specifically slavery in this situation. So this is kind of going beyond the scope of the question or the line. And then there is no clear indication of the audience's beliefs. So this is just, it should be obvious that a man is in charge of himself. For 33, we're looking for the abolitionist persuasive methods will have to take into account their opponent's inability to understand something. So whatever the abolitionists are doing is going to have to take into account something about their opponents. So let's see what their opponents don't understand. Lines 3 through 6, 6 through 10, 10 through 12, and 12 through 16. So 3 through 6, here we meet time after time. Newspapers are printed and speeches delivered to prove what? Why a man is a man and that he is the only human possessor of himself. This is missing connection to the opposition, so we can get rid of that one. But these propositions are self-evident propositions, and self-evident propositions, as we all know, though the most difficult to prove, are the most easily understood because they need no proof. So again, no discussion of the opposition, so we can get rid of that one. The mind sees their truth intuitively without the aid of reasoning. And I think that is the end of that one. Again, no discussion of the opposition. The attempt to prove them would be ridiculous were it not for the consideration of the amazing state of delusion to which prejudice reduces mind when unenlightened by reason. So this is proving it to the opposition, and the state of delusion is referencing the opposition. So D is going to be our answer for our line of evidence. So D, we know, discusses the unenlightened, disillusioned aspect of the opponent. And so if they are unenlightened, they don't know anything. There's no discussion of political rhetoric. There's no discussion of authority. They're just disillusioned and unenlightened. When we get between logic and emotion, unenlightened and disillusioned tend to go more towards knowledge. So this is going to be logical arguments. A central claim in the passage, so again, we can get rid of any example that is a detail. Public resistance to a cause delays the progress of justice by discouraging reformers. That's pretty broad stroke, so I'm not going to get rid of it yet. Garrison is unlike most reformers. He is not even brought up until the last paragraph, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one. Reformers face significant challenges in addressing social injustice of their eras. That's accurate because we brought up a couple of reformers, not only the current abolitionists, but also others. Slavery is harder to eliminate than other forms of oppression. Even though this is about abolition, it doesn't go so far to say this, and that would be a detail if they did. So between A and B, I don't see a discussion of the delay, and so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of A because of that and choose C. Now again, we said that we would come back to this one if we have time, so let's just let B stand for now. The description of Galileo's experience primarily serves two. So if we look back, this is going to be, we threw Galileo in jail because he said things we didn't like, and then we made him lie to get out. So it's kind of a, Galileo is our reformer, and look what we did to him. That was not a great decision. So it serves to encourage the audience to appreciate the contributions of early reformers. Maybe not quite. It's not necessarily talking about what he contributed, more of what we did to him. Introduce an alternative explanation for prejudice. Galileo wasn't an explanation for the current prejudice. It was just, let's look at what happened when we did this to people in the past. Caution the audience about the dangers of espousing revolutionary ideas. So I like this idea of caution, but it was really cautioning us not to do what we did to Galileo, not to have the revolutionary ideas he had. So we can get rid of C. Illustrate a preceding or previous generalization about the effects of ignorance. So yes, because we were ignorant, we threw Galileo in jail when we shouldn't have. So 37 is going to be D. All right, number 38. This is an inference with a follow-up. The passage strongly suggests that a society dominated by prejudice has which effect on its members. So we need to see this society being dominated by prejudice and then what happens to its members. All right, 21 through 30 and then 30 through 35. So 21 through 30. And then 30 through 35 started with when. And then we'll pick up after that. Okay. When, therefore, we see the control which prejudice, aided by circumstances and encouraged by self-interest, has in times past exercised over the human mind, okay, the tenacity with which it has held its deluded victims, stopping up the avenues of improvement, clipping the wings of genius, and slowing the progress of truth, when we see the minds whose energies have been crippled and whose spheres of action have been curtailed by its influence. So that already feels pretty good. When we see the tremendous power which reformers have brought to bear against the prevailing sins of the ages in which they lived, the firm opposition they encountered. So this is more about reformers and what they encounter, whereas the first one talks about prejudice. So I'm inclined to think it's A over B. So I'm going to go ahead and, wrong button. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of B. Let's look at C and D, 47 through 51, and then 53 through 58. So 47 through 51. A gloom hung over the moral atmosphere, which nothing seemingly could dissipate, save a miracle from God himself. All saw it, but no one dared expose his own storm. So this is not about prejudice, more about like that opposition. All right, and then 53, 1, 2, 3. But mind, like matter, must have its legitimate scope. There are always some spirits who will resist such unnatural domination. So we don't, again, get any discussion of prejudice. So it is going to be here where it talks about kind of slowing progress and clipping the wings and just making it harder for the members of society. So the members are less inspired to fight justice. They are prevented from reaching their fullest potential. Maybe that's closer to clipping of the wings. They most commonly feel discouraged and frightened. I don't see any discouragement, more of like the slowing of progress and the clipping of wings. They become corrupt. There's no discussion of corruption. So I think because of the clipping of wings and the slowing of progress, this idea of prevention is going to be evident, and so it is B. All right, 47, the phrase their traducers have represented. So we just have a few more questions to go. This is kind of a big one. Line 41 through 42. We need to see what they mean by this phrase as their traducers have represented. So let's go ahead and go to this one and dive into it. The modern champions of freedom, those are the abolitionists, do not have so much impracticality as their traducers or the anti-abolitionists have represented. So the anti-abolitionists are representing that they have more of something than they really do. So the traducers means that the opponents of abolitionists, those traducers themselves, are representing that they have more of something than they really do. So they are, there's no discussion of motives. There's no discussion of ideals or the symbols of ideals. They're saying that there's something that they are not, so that is distorting the truth. And it might be misrepresenting something, but it's not an event so much as an idea. And so this is going to be C. 41, our attitude towards Garrison. So remember we met him in that kind of final paragraph, right after that discussion of the father of American abolition or anti-slavery. So let's see. The author's attitude about Garrison. So the father of American anti-slavery, which we identified as Garrison. In the dark hour, he arose to cheer us on our gloomy pathway. The shafts of criticism and sarcasm and denunciation that rang against him told only where he stood up unscathed, his moral and intellectual might, and bearing down all opposition. The result is well known, and he does not need a eulogy from me. So, intellectual, he stood up unscathed, all these people were against him, but he seems like a pretty solid guy. So deep admiration, that could be good. Gratitude, he might be thankful for him, but it seems more like he's just really praising him, so I'm going to get rid of that one. Mild impatience is negative, and we know he feels positively about him. Disappointment, again, is negative, and so this has to be A. Finally, we have the phrase at once, and as we read through it, we noticed that he was receiving two oppositional things at the same time. So he is greeted with smiles and frowns, blessings and cursings, and these are happening at the same time. So not at first. These things do not correspond with each other. And it's not that it's like happening with a real clear-cut purpose. It's just that it's happening at the same time. All right, so that is passage 4. Hey guys, so today we are going to do passage 5 on the March 2021. This is a paired passage. So remember, as a rule, we want to make sure that we don't do our paired passage last if timing is in any way an issue, simply because they do generally take more time. So when you open a test, the first thing you're going to look at is passage 5 to see if it's paired. If it is paired, go ahead and save passage 3 for last. Remember, because passage 3 will have a graph if passage 5 is paired. It's like guaranteed. So saving that graph passage for last is going to be a good timing decision. So since this is paired, let's take a look. We always want to read this intro information first, I can already tell that one piece was written in 2011, one was written in 2017. Because it's science, it's informative by nature, this means that the newer article is going to have some new information. So the title of the first one is Free Floating Planets May Be More Common Than Stars. And the second one is called Fewer Big Rogue Planets Roam the Galaxy, Recount Shows. So it looks like these are going to disagree with each other. Let's go ahead and diagnose our questions just for passage 1. I know that passage 1 ends on line 50, so anything that references something after that, I don't need to diagnose yet. Number 43 says, do the results of the survey described in passage 1 support the conclusion that there are twice as many Jupiter-mass free-floating planets as Earth-mass ones? So we have to read this entire question. It doesn't have any of our key phrases, but because it is so detailed and it's asking for something specific from the passage, and it's just saying, does it support this? I know that it is a content question. Before I reread that for information, I'm going to see if there is a command of evidence follow-up, and there is. So let's just loop those together and we'll worry about them later. Number 45 says according to passage 2, so I can already stop here. That is a quick little thing. So I'm reading passage 1 just really quickly for general information. I know that my only 2 questions on it are going to have a COE follow-up, so that's not going to take me, I don't need to look for information as I'm reading. So let's just see what broad scopes we can get out of this. A survey scanned towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy during 2006 and 7, revealing evidence of up to 10 free-floating planets about the size of Jupiter. The isolated orbs, also known as orphan planets, are difficult to spot and had gone undetected until now. The planets are located at an average distance of 10,000 to 20,000 light years from Earth. So we just have some background. This could be just the tip of the iceberg. The team estimates there are about twice as many free-floating Jupiter-mass planets as stars. In addition, these worlds are thought to be at least as common as planets that orbit stars. This adds up to hundreds of billions of lone planets in our Milky Way galaxy alone. Our survey is like a population census, said David Bennett, co-author of the 2011 survey. We sampled a portion of the galaxy, and based on these data, can estimate overall numbers in the galaxy. So it looks like instead of looking at the whole sky, they just looked at a chunk and then kind of determined what was happening everywhere else. The survey is not sensitive to planets smaller or with lower mass than Jupiter and Saturn, but theories suggest lower mass planets like Earth would be ejected from their stars more often. As a result, they are thought to be more common than free-floating Jupiters. Previous observations spotted a handful of free-floating planet-like objects within star-forming clusters with masses 3 times that of Jupiter. But scientists suspect the gaseous bodies form more like stars than planets. These small dim orbs, called brown dwarfs, grow from collapsing balls of gas and dust, but lack the mass to ignite their nucleus fuel and shine with starlight. It is thought the smallest brown dwarfs are approximately the size of large planets. On the other hand, it is likely that some planets are ejected from their early turbulent solar systems due to close gravitational encounters with other planets or stars. So it's not necessarily that they are rogue, but they're being sucked into something else. Without a star to circle, these planets would move through the galaxy as our Sun and other stars do in stable orbits around the galaxy's center. The discovery of 10 free-floating Jupiters support the ejection scenario, though it's possible both mechanisms are at play. So there are 2 different mechanisms that we just learned about. If free-floating planets formed like stars, then we would have expected to see only 1 or 2 of them in our survey instead of 10. Our results suggest that planetary systems often become unstable with planets being kicked out of their places of birth. All right, so we can go back to our question. It looks like we're learning about free-floating planets, these rogue planets, how they're ejected, how they come to be, what sizes are supposed to be more prevalent than others. And this is asking, do the results of the survey, so I need to see a survey, support the conclusion that there are twice as many Jupiter mass as Earth mass? So I need to find a line that talks about the number of Jupiter mass versus Earth mass and see if it supports this conclusion that there are more Earth size than Jupiter, so smaller than big. Lines 1 through 4. A survey scanned towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy, revealing evidence of up to 10 free-floating planets, roughly the mass of Jupiter. So it gives us the survey in the Jupiter mass, but not the Earth, so this cannot be my answer. 9 through 11. This could be just the tip of the iceberg. The team estimates there are about twice as many free-floating Jupiter mass planets as stars. So that gives me, again, the Jupiter mass, but not the Earth. It references stars instead, so that is not it. 20 through 23. 3. The survey is not sensitive to planets smaller than Jupiter or Saturn, but theories suggest lower mass planets like Earth could be ejected from their stars more often. So that references both. I'm going to hold on to that. 26 through 30. Previous observations spot a handful of free-floating planets, planet-like objects within star-forming clusters with masses 3 times that of Jupiter, but they suspect the gaseous bodies form more like stars than planets. Okay, so we don't see anything in there about Jupiter versus Earth. So this is our answer. Notice that it says the survey is not sensitive to smaller planets, but theories suggest there might be more Earth than Jupiter. But that's not conclusive. We're looking for something that concludes it, so it's going to be one of my no's because the survey is not sensitive to it. No, because the survey shows that there are more Earth mass planets than Jupiter mass, not necessarily. No, because the survey does not include direct information. So this is what we're looking for. Because the survey is not sensitive to it, it does not include direct information. All right, so let's diagnose passage 2's questions. So as soon as we see both passages referenced, we can stop. According to passage 2, great little content question. It does not have a COE follow-up, so we're looking for Mroz and his colleagues analyze microlensing 2. So this is just why did they analyze microlensing events? So that's going to be my key detail, microlensing. As used in line 78, this word, so that is a clear word in context. Line 78, account for 6, 7, 8. The 6th paragraph of passage 2 serves as both, so purpose function. I'm going to go to 85 through 92. Notice that this takes over 2 pages. Don't forget to read these little chunks on the 2nd page. They often get neglected. Number 48, as used in line 59, giving up most nearly means, so another word in context. This one must be printed a little bit out of order because we're seeing line 59 after line 78. So let's go back, giving up. And it looks like that is our last one for this because the next one references the relationship between 2 passages. So 59, giving up. So I need to look for microlensing events and why they're used or why they're analyzed, and then my 2 word in context, and then this paragraph, what is it doing? In a new study, Mroz of this place and his colleagues estimated the number of large rogue planets in our galaxy using a technique called microlensing. Okay, so my answer is going to be somewhere within this sentence. Sometimes I have to read up, sometimes I have to read down. When an object with a mass of a planet passes in front of a distant background star, the gravity of the star acts as a gravitational magnifying glass, distorts and focuses the light, giving up the planet's existence. So this kind of reminds me of when I try to play hide and seek with my kid and my dogs give me up. They like tell everybody where I am. So it's like showing where it is. Showing. Mroz and colleagues looked at 2,000 microlensing events recorded between 2010 and 2005 and determined which were caused by a rogue planet. For every typical star called main sequence stars, there are 0.25 free-floating Jupiter mass planets. The new results sharply contrast an estimate published in 2011. This is referencing our previous passage directly, which suggests that rogue Jupiters are almost twice as common as main sequence stars. About 90% of stars in the universe are main sequence stars, so if that estimate were accurate, there should be a lot of free-floating Jupiters. That result changed our conceptual framework of the universe just a little bit, says astronomer Liu of the University of Hawaii. It challenged long-held ideas about how planets go rogue because the known methods wouldn't generate enough planets to blank for all the wanderers. So we know we know about all the wanderers, and we know how some of them came up, but we can't really, I guess, explain where the other ones came from. The 2011 result was based on a relatively small sample of microlensing. Since then, infrared telescope images haven't detected any free-floating planets as expected. Over the years, serious doubts were cast over the claims of large populations. Mroz says, David Bennett, co-author of the 2011 study, agrees that the new census failed to find evidence of large population of Jupiter rogue planets. Okay, so one thing he does is agree. He notes, however, so this might be a disagreement, that the new data do reveal 4 times as many Jupiter-mass failed stars called brown dwarfs than predicted in the original census. So some of the rogues that were originally classified as planets may be in fact failed stars. So he kind of agrees and disagrees. Liu says the last census is much more in line with theories of how planets form. Most rogues should be Earth mass or a little heavier. Those lighter planets got tossed out of their planetary systems much easier than behemoths like Jupiter. All right, so why did he use microlensing? Why did he analyze microlensing? So he did this. It says that they estimated the number of large rogue planets using that. So they must have done it to estimate the number. So confirm results? No, because we already said he disagrees with the results. Discover minimum required mass? No, it looks like we're just counting. Yep, estimating numbers, so it's not A or B. Compare the relative size? No. Determine how many? So this goes with our estimation. So in line 78, we said that we know these wanderers, we know where they are and what they are, but the methods can't explain them. And look, explain is one of our answers. We don't know how they came to be. The sixth paragraph serves as both, and so we said that he agreed, but then he kind of explained this other idea that maybe is oppositional to the agreement. So a corroboration of recent findings. Okay, so that's accurate because he does kind of agree. And a suggestion of a potential flaw in the method used to arrive at them. Okay, so I don't know that I love this part, so I'm going to hold on to it, but we're going to think about it a little bit. A criticism of the method? Nope. An acknowledgement of recent findings? Yes. And an explanation of how they might reflect on previous findings. So this second part is also accurate, so that already feels stronger than A. A revision of a previous claim and a rebuttal of a criticism. Nope, so just C. All right, so one more on passage 2. Giving up. So we talked about hide and seek and showing where something is. And so showing is like revealing. All right, so we already talked about the fact that these passages kind of disagree with one another. So when we think of the relationship between them, passage 2 is going to have new information that disagrees with the findings from passage 1. So the results of a study outlined in passage 2 challenge the results of a study in passage 1. Yes. Scientists discussed in passage 2 extended the research. Well, extending the research suggests that they agree. The data shown in passage 2 supports. Nope. The research of passage 2 identifies variables that the researchers failed to consider. So that would be like you're wrong because of something specific that would change how this worked, and that's not really what it looked like. So it's A. On which point about free-floating mass planets do the passages most clearly disagree? Whether there are? No, they agree that there are. How many there are? Whether Jupiter mass planets can distort and focus light? No. How similar brown dwarfs are to Jupiter mass planets? So the whole disagreement was which there are more of, and so B is going to be our answer. Oh, we missed that this was a COE follow-up. So I tell you what, let's rescan all this and make sure that we have it correct. Okay, 51 through 55. Let's see. In a new study, they estimated the number of large rogue planets in our galaxy using a technique called microlensing. So that just tells us what they do. 60 through 62. Ross and his colleagues looked at these microlensing events and determined which were caused by a rogue planet. So again, that's just kind of the method section. 66 through 69. The new results sharply contrast the estimate published in 2011, which suggests that rogue Jupiters are almost twice as common. So we had it right, and that is our line of evidence. So C, and how many? Last one, what scientific ideas suggested in both? Lower mass are more likely to be